Is sampling stealing? Well, yeah, and no. It depends. I'm not talking about in the legal sense. That's what lawyers are for. But I wanted to talk about sampling in the context of creative theft, or what you may have heard of as stealing like an artist. There certainly are varying degrees of this concept, and as always, I'm going to show you some musical examples, specifically one that kind of got me thinking really hard about this. Apologies for the drab or lack of background. I just moved and I'm still getting settled and need to decorate my studio. But it's really good to be back. Happy to see you all. So let's start with a quick tune I've been working on this past week. It's a bit of a hodgepodge intentionally. I wanted to create something with two distinct patterns, utilizing different sounds that were accomplishing the same roles underneath a melody that provided consistent context between kind of two different beats. Sort of a fun exercise on the Octatrack that ended up sparking the idea for this video, focused on the use of the crossfader. So let's break this down. I started this off with a drum loop. So I did some parameter locking, super basic slicing, added some compression and saturation to just kind of get it to sonically reside where I wanted it to. But otherwise, this beat is not something that I created. It's something I selected. It's not really something I typically do, ever really, at least in terms with drum beats. I really like programming drums myself, and I feel like I've developed kind of a signature sound in how I go about it, so it's a fun and important part of the process to me. I do like to sample a lot of textures and chords and progressions, the same way I would sample my own playing if it's guitar or modular or whatever. But when it comes to drums, I tend to do everything myself. But I was messing around with the Bath Splice sample pack, which I've used on my Digitact quite a bit, but I just loaded it to the Octatrack, and I found this loop that I thought sounded really, really cool. So I kind of stretched it a bit, sliced it up to the grid, added a couple of little turnarounds to affect the timing of some of the hits, but I didn't really do that much to change it. I just kind of manipulated the timing to mold the vibe that I was going for. So objectively, no, this is not stealing. It is part of a sample pack that I paid money for, that is then licensed to me. I don't know legally how that works, but it's the equivalent effectively of using anything like public domain, I think. But I still feel pretty weird about using it because of the specific character and intricacy it has. It's not just like a 4 on the floor kick loop. And at the same time, it was really easy for me to manipulate it the way I wanted to fit the context that I was using it in. It's almost something similar to a beat that I would have made myself and could have, but all of the work was done for me. So the concept of stealing like an artist, covered in this book, is basically taking concepts, aspects, components, pieces of anything of a source of inspiration and using those in the context of your own work. So reframing them to the point where you're not just copying, but you're using explicit ideas in your own work, but obviously putting your own spin on it. Paraphrasing, definitely read the book. So that's essentially what this is, right? And to be honest, I really love the result. It feels like something I would create, but at the same time, it kind of just feels wrong to me. And I don't mean to discredit people who work exclusively in this fashion, because I know that there are a lot of really successful, creative, and talented artists who do, but I'm just not super used to it myself, and it's the first time I've ever used a drum loop like this, so it got me thinking quite a bit about the topic. But now that I've rambled for a bit, let's get into a little bit more of the beat breakdown to show you how I did implement things myself, because this is just one part of the beat. So this is a bit of a piano loop, also from the pack. And this is just an example of like a textural loop that I was using. It's very background. I mean, And I just kind of tuned it to the pitch of those bells in the drum beat. Next, on this side of things, on the A side of the crossfader, we have this bass synth. This is from the Blank Form sample pack. Again, another example of taking a texture, side chaining it, adding melody or, chords, a root, because it's a bass line. And then this is my favorite part, the melody. So if you're not familiar, this is Bath's voice, and this is also from a sample. But here's a part that drastically varies from the way I use the drum loop, because here is the vocal loop. It's really quite interesting and cool, and Will Wiesenfeld, the artist behind Baths, has a really interesting way of singing and vocalizing. This is the whole loop. I added that sort of pumping, that sidechain compression of the sample and the reverb in the background that swells in and out. I assigned an LFO to the dark reverb on that track. So you can see the mix is pretty low, and I have an LFO, an inverse triangle wave, affecting the depth. So it swells in and out. And you can see on all the different trigs, it's really quite cool. I basically chopped up the sample. I sliced it and chopped it in sort of typical workflow that somebody might do that in, by taking a single piece of that melody, well, multiple pieces, and assigning them to different parameters. So that sense of sampling is where I feel a lot more comfortable, where I'm taking audio source and using that as an instrument. So to implement the crossfader, and what I mentioned I wanted to set out to do with this beat, is to create context across two different patterns, by keeping a melody, but changing the beat. So this is the beat for the second part. And I did the same thing. I took a drum loop that I thought went well, time stretched it, compressed it, and came up with this. So this is A, and this is B. I added this, I think it's a mandolin sample. That's what it sounds like to me, at least. And this mandolin just sounds like this. It's just this loop. So again, just a bit of a rhythm and the instrument itself. That I added context to by playing chords with it on the sampler. Again, more similar to my typical workflow of sampling. And then I added a bass line. This bass line is really interesting, I think, because if you listen to it by itself, you can tell that it's a sample that's maybe a bit time stretched or pitched in certain points, like when it goes up here. It sounds a little bit rubber bandy, but in a way it's almost kind of like a soft Rickenbacker type sound, which I really like for bass tones. But what I did here is I played around a lot with parameter locking the amplitude envelope, so you can see the hold time for each of these is adjusted in some places, so that default hold time isn't too high, but some of them I wanted to cut short or like really short to use as kind of like a muted hit. So I really tried as hard as I could to humanize this bass sound. And here is the sound by itself. That's just, a quick cutoff, but it's actually a bass, a root chord progression taken from the Bath sample pack. But here's it with the drum beat. So yeah, very non-conventional type of sound, but I thought it was really cool and provided a contrast to this more sort of like chill, pumpy, electronic sound. Got this kind of like tropical spaghetti western type of deal going on. I don't really know. But again, it was a super fun exercise and I really liked the result. In particular, this guitar melody part, or mandolin melody, got me thinking about sampling in particular too. I was thinking about the prevalence of certain chord progressions. For example, say like a 1-4-5 on guitar. Very simple, basic power chord progression used in punk music or pop music or anything really, to be honest. So yeah, these genres of music exist to classify certain parameters of things to put it into a category that a listener can identify and be familiar with and say, I like this. You can write a song in the framework of those contexts of genres and give them to people and they'll say, yeah, this is a great punk song, or this is a great blues song. But maybe the writer of the song or the musician behind it didn't do anything new. They were just following that set of guidelines. They took a system that existed, they copied it, and they made a product out of it. But maybe it's the first time they've done that themselves, through their own lens. And that makes it a novel experience for them. Listeners, at least your average listener, isn't going to question the artistic validity of that. If somebody is really into a certain genre and they hear a new song that fits the confines of that genre, they might be really into it. They're not going to question the prevalence of these tropes in popular music in that regard. Is this the same thing as taking a drum loop or a sample like that and using it without changing it very much? That is, taking something that already exists, using it in your own music, and then being able to focus on other creative aspects like melodies elsewhere or chopping things up or lyrics or melody. I think, yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as playing a 4-chord acoustic sing-along song by the campfire. These musical tropes, these workflow standards exist and become constructs of genre so people can find music that they like and relate to. And more importantly, perhaps, they create a space for musicians to make music within that they feel comfortable with so that they can take advantage of other aspects of their creative process that they want to shine. So, sorry if this was all a little bit heady. I just moved last week, as I mentioned, and I actually had a really, really bad cold, so I've been kind of out of it. I haven't made music in a while. It's the first time I've sat down to make a song in a few weeks, maybe a month, and it's the first video I've made in about a month. So I've got a lot on my mind, both musically and philosophically. But yeah, that's just my thoughts. I would love to hear yours on this topic. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot of loaded opinions and perspectives. So yeah, hash it out down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I certainly used to be an angsty elitist 16-year-old who thought electronic music wasn't real music. And now I'm an angsty elitist 30-year-old who likes electronic music a little bit more, you could say. And sampling, to me, is just as musically valid as stealing your favorite chord progression from your favorite band. If you're interested in hearing some other stuff from this Bath sample pack and hearing about my sampling workflow in general, check out some of these videos. As always, thanks for watching and thanks for stopping by. Peace.